Brought to you by PrayLatin.com, makers of prayer cards featuring complete English phonetic renderings of Latin pronunciations.
An interesting interview came across my desk in the past few days, as published initially by Marco Tosatti, the Italian journalist with rather extensive ties in the Roman Curia. And this interview is one done with an exorcist. Now, this is not an exorcist who is known for doing the rounds and going to conferences and giving addresses and showing up on podcasts and things. This is, by his own admission, an exorcist who lives in a monastery, barely keeps up with what's going on in the outside world except through the newspapers. And even from what little he has seen in the outside world through newspapers and such, he has some stark warnings for people. I thought this would be an interesting thing to think about as we start a new year and as we still celebrate Christmas as Catholics, but we also start keeping an eye on Easter because Lent is coming. It is not far away by any stretch. And it's time to start thinking at least a little bit about that. We fast and do acts of penance for our own sins and sins of others. And what better people to do penance for than those who not only have strayed far from God, but actively work against him. See, he is asked in this interview several questions, and I'm going to give you the highlights here through his responses to them. And the first of his questions is rather straightforward. So, Satanism. And he specifically asked, how widespread is Satanism among young people today? And the answer here may disturb you because he equates two things with he equates something here with Satanism. Of course, there's the overt worship of the devil, but more importantly, the very values of the Western world today, this hedonistic, rugged individualism, at least this individualism that purports to be able to warp reality to suit its own desires and weird tastes, that is a hallmark of Satanism, according to the priest. So here he is asked by his interviewer, how widespread is Satanism among the people? And his answer, quote, being a monk and therefore quite external to social reality. In fact, I live in a monastery in the countryside. I do not have the exact perception of how widespread Satanism is among young people. However, having the possibility of accessing newspapers, I've noticed that in television programs, and especially in social networks, very popular with young people, Satanism, or in any case, messages that support an individualistic and hedonistic mentality, are very present. End quote. He then goes on to explain some of the causes of all of this, including widespread acceptance of some pagan practices, like yoga, as well as the normalization of the dark arts in the culture. The celebration of Wicca and all sorts of other forms of, representation of ancient pre-Christian worship. All of these things are the hallmarks of Satanism. That should cause a bit of concern given the things that we see in the church today, of this attempt to make mainstream and bring into the church pre-Christian practices as in a way to make peoples of various groups feel better about themselves and more welcome. Those are the hallmarks of Satanism. He also warns against some, but not all, tattoos. Again, to be clear, some, but not all. And there is some evidence that there are some tattoo artists who make their own inks and things, and that they actually do incantations or something as part of their own personal diabolical belief system, as opposed to, say the inks that are made in a factory somewhere. But you should be aware of these things. After that discourse, he moves on to the central theme of his interview, however, and that is the topic of demonic possession. He is asked the following, quote, how do you know if someone is possessed? To which he responds, possession is the highest degree of extraordinary intervention of the devil on the person. In possession, the person loses control of his own body and thoughts that are taken over by the devil, who acts and manifests himself through that person. Possession manifests itself clearly during the rite of exorcism, but remains latent and manifests itself sporadically in everyday life, when the person is unable to resist certain behaviors or thoughts that are acted out by the devil. It is difficult to understand the signs of possession outside of the rite because they can be gestures of any person. However, they are always behaviors that reveal a characteristic of distance from the teaching of Christ. That is, sinful behaviors with cold determination and without repentance. To which he is asked, in what cases does one fall victim to the devil? And the response, there are 3 ways to fall victim to the devil. The first is the most common. It is a life far from Christ. Therefore, lack of prayer, of attending Sunday Mass, of the sacrament of reconciliation, and of charity towards others. The second is the frequenting of esoteric and secretive environments, or putting into practices that refer to those environments. Third, it is being a victim of the envy of people who practice the dark arts. But in this case, if one is in communion with God through Mass, personal prayer, confession, and works of charity, these attacks are barely perceived and ultimately appear harmless. To which his interviewer then says, it seems that there is no longer any sense of sin. Everything is permitted, especially towards the 6th and 9th commandment, not to mention the 1st and 2nd. Sin is essentially a behavior in opposition to the teachings of God. The perception of having committed a sin in itself is proper to the Christian. Those who are Christian only in name or not at all do not have this sense of sin. The fact remains that even if not perceived, what is committed is a sin. In fact, if the 6th commandment, you shall not commit adultery, and the 9th, you shall not desire another man's wife, are considered limits, and therefore one does otherwise, one still pays the consequences, since the commandments are rules of life, and there is no civilization in the world that allows the legitimate desire of a woman married to others, and that one ensnares her to the detriment of her legitimate husband. Regarding the 1st commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, and the 2nd, you shall not take the name of God in vain, they certainly make explicit reference to the Christian faith. The point is the consequence of not taking them into consideration causes the person to relate and rely on the other lords who will dominate him without mercy. To which his interviewer asks, does continued obstinacy in sin make one easy prey to diabolical possession, or has the infernal spirit already taken control of the person, as he or she shows no signs of repenting even when warned? Diabolical possession can easily manifest itself in a life of distance from God, and therefore with sinful behaviors, stealing, lying, the ending of life, betraying, and on the other hand, such behaviors can certainly occur in possessed persons. To which the interviewer asks the logical question, it seems that darkness is gaining more and more power. What is the remedy? And the response is the obvious one. The remedy is simple, ancient, and always current. Stay united with the Lord. Diabolical possession, demonic possession. You'll notice every exorcist you ever hear speak about this tells you that the hallmarks are all around us in the society today. We saw this during the secular observances of Christmas. The New York Times deciding that right then and there was a profound time to go after our blessed Lord and Our Lady's virginity. But there are more broadly just all around us at all times. This atomization, this I am an individual who has no need of other people stuff, this lack of charity, this normalization of sin, not just making sin normal, but making it so that you are, in fact, a bad person if you do not go along with this total inversion of the moral foundation of society. You are, in fact, the bad person if you object. We've seen that all too often. And social media does help make that even worse. One has to only look to, say, like TikTok or places like that to see just how out of touch with reality things can truly get, and how what the fingerprints of the devil look like on the souls of especially young people who have come to believe in all sorts of really warped ideas about the mutable nature of reality, how their flesh can be altered and manipulated to appear in any way that they like. People encouraged to live a lie. That is a central mark of the devil. So pray on this in this calendar year. There is a new year here, and if there's any resolution that is good and meet and just, a new resolution would be to pray for those who appear to be at least influenced by the devil, which, by the way, is virtually everybody to some degree. After all, we all make use of the sacrament of penance. At least I hope you do. Let me know what you think of this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you haven't. It certainly does help. So does sharing this on social media. That helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.